You know, when you drive around town, I don't know if you're like me, and you sometimes get tempted to pull up real close to the car in front of you when you come up to an intersection because you want to read that bumper sticker that they've got on the back bumper. And so, everyone has seen that bumper sticker that says, "A bad day fishing is better than a good day at the office." Maybe you've also seen the bumper sticker that reads, "If you can read this, I've lost my trailer." Or that other bumper sticker that says, "Ask me about my vow of silence." Pastors like that one, I guess. You might have your own favorite. A few weeks ago, I was driving down State Line Road, and there was a minivan in front of me, and I was struck by the bumper sticker on that vehicle because it said, "Self-reliant Americans on board." Thought that was interesting. We certainly are a country that lifts up an ethic of self-reliance, to be sure. We talk about being self-starters, a self-made man, a self-made woman, someone who pulls themselves up by their own bootstraps. There's an admirable quality beneath all of that, which speaks about a heavy emphasis on hard work and really striving to do all that you can do yourself. It's an emphasis on independence, and it's deeply ingrained in our society. And in good measure, I think it's a great virtue. At the same time, however, that bumper sticker made me think about this scene in the temple from the Gospel of Luke. Luke sets the scene. Jesus also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. You almost don't need to read the parable. Jesus does what he's been doing a lot of in Luke, in that he reverses what happens to our expectations. It's kind of like how it was that 10th leper who turned back to Jesus, and he was a Samaritan of all things. So in this parable, in walks the Pharisee and a tax collector. We're used to Jesus criticizing Pharisees. So we kind of have a different perspective, I think, on Pharisees than would, say, a first century audience hearing this parable. They, when hearing that a Pharisee went into the temple, would have been conjuring up an image of a person that they hold with just the utmost respect. This was a pious leader of the faith. Tax collectors, on the other hand, were roundly despised. Now, the tax collector of that day was a little different from our modern day IRS. Not that folks love the IRS. But tax collectors in the first century were somewhat like franchise owners. They got the rights to collect the tax for a particular area. And then they would go out and do their business of gathering those taxes. And sometimes they would have their underlings who would gather taxes and, pay them up. And anything that the tax collectors gathered beyond what was due to the local authorities, they could pocket for themselves. It was profit. So they were seen as thieves and vultures. Then come these prayers. The Pharisee asks absolutely nothing of God. Instead, the Pharisee gives thanks to himself, really, that he's not a sinner like that vile tax collector. The Pharisee is bursting with pride. And do you notice that this great man of faith, who's so bursting with pride, his pride gets in between himself and this tax collector over here? That tax collector, meanwhile, makes no boast of God. Instead, offers this prayer: God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And that's the way most translations render this. Be merciful to me, a sinner. But the Greek actually says, God, be merciful to me, the sinner. As though I'm like the sinner above all sinners. This is someone owning this sense of waywardness and loss. This is one of those parables that forces us to pick sides. Are we ourselves more like the righteous Pharisee, plays by all the rules, does everything we're supposed to be doing, but might be a little quick to critique someone else? Or are we more like this penitent tax collector? Edwin Martin is a poet who wrote about this question. And his poem goes like this: within my earthly temple, there's a crowd. There's one of us that's humble, one that's proud. There's one that's broken-hearted for his sins. There's one that, unrepentant, sits and grins. There's one that loves his neighbor as himself, and one that cares for naught but fame and self. For much corroding care I should be free, if I could once determine which is me. Are we the Pharisee, or are we the tax collector, or are we perhaps a little bit of both? Do we feel self-righteous, or do we feel penitent? Are we self-assured to the point of arrogance, or are we mindful of our brokenness and our complete dependence upon the grace of God? One evening, there was an old Cherokee chief sitting outside, and his grandson comes up and sits with him. And so the grandfather tells his grandson about a battle that goes on inside of people. And he said, "My son, the battle is between two wolves. One is evil. It is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. The other is good. It is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith." The little boy thought about that for a little while. And then he asked, "Grandfather, which wolf wins?" And the old Cherokee chief replied, "The one that you feed." How can we feed righteousness in this place? Our society is all about what's new, the latest technology, the latest app. But a pretty good answer of how we can pursue righteousness comes from 450 years ago in what is called the Heidelberg Catechism. It's a teaching tool of our church from years ago. Question and answer formatting. Question 60 was, "How art thou righteous before God?" And the answer was, "Only by true faith in Jesus Christ. That is, although my conscience accuse me that I have grievously sinned against all the commandments of God, and have never kept any of them, and that I am still prone always to all evil, yet Yet God, without merit of mine, of mere grace, grants and imputes to me the perfect satisfaction, righteousness, and holiness of Christ, as if I had never committed nor had any sin, and had myself accomplished all the obedience which Christ has fulfilled for me, if only I accept such benefit with a believing heart. Our path to righteousness, our way to get good with God, if you will, begins by recognizing our total, utter dependence upon God. We are a broken people, and we are only made whole by the forgiving, loving grace of God in Jesus Christ. Now, if we were to accept that truth for ourselves, it would affect dramatically how we live our every day and our every hour and our every interaction with anyone we meet. How we interact with our fellow sinner sitting next to us in the pew, or having coffee with us in the parlor, or serving on our committee, or singing in the choir, or outside this church, friends that we have, colleagues that we meet. It would affect how we act with everyone we come in contact with. And for me, the two marks of seeking this righteous life are, number one, that we do love one another, and number two, that we do forgive one another. Number two, that we forgive one another seems to be perhaps the anchor of our living this righteous life. Now, the lectionary makes an odd choice today. Here we have the Gospel of Luke with this text which seems so straightforward and clear, and the lectionary pairs with this the reading from 2 Timothy, where the Apostle Paul says, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. From now on there is reserved for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. Paul sounds a bit like that Pharisee. A person certain of their own righteousness. Now, Paul, of course, was a Pharisee. But there are many differences between this Pharisee, Paul, and the Pharisee in the temple. Rather than standing in a temple before a crowd and crowing, Paul is writing from prison. Rather than giving himself all the credit, Paul credits this righteous judge. Rather than congratulating himself at the expense of everyone else that he can look down upon, Paul notes that this righteousness is not only available to him, but to all, bless you, but to all who long for the Lord. So today is Commitment Sunday. It is a day when we come forward to offer our financial support for the ministry of Jesus Christ in this place. And this commitment begins with our reliance on God, our understanding that apart from God, we can't accomplish anything. This is a reliance that doesn't separate us, but that draws us closer together. You and me, among ourselves, and between ourselves and the very holy God. Amen.